Well, I'll start off with my name is Daryl Breeden, and I'm sorry if I look tired. This is like my fourth take of this starting point of the video because I didn't realize my Meta headset had connected and just royally screwed up Windows audio settings, so the DJI Mic Mini sounded like it was a trash can. So either way, if you've ever seen me before on YouTube, you've probably seen my videos focused on resin printing and 3D in painting or cycling. But this will be a wildly different topic. I've always wanted to be an author. I've had a lot of, books I've wanted to write, stories I've wanted to tell, but the mechanical nature of writing, just the process of doing the thing and putting the words on paper is slow. And I have 3 young boys, so when you need that much dedication, it's really hard to get the time for it. And to put that in perspective, like Stephen King is, famously known for, saying he writes about 2,000 words a day. If you extrapolate that out to an 80,000 word book, that's 40 days of consistent writing. And I could never pull the time together for that. So when AI first came around, specifically ChatGPT, I was very interested maybe this could help me write the book the way I'd always wanted to. And it seemed like it was going to, and then all fell apart pretty quickly. The context window for ChatGPT, even in 4, even now in 5, the token window is really small, and there's massive problems about maintaining contextual consistency between components. So it didn't really work out. I had told myself, like, oh, it's not worth it. Fast forward about a year, Anthropic announces a 1 million token context window for Claude Max. And I was like, all right, it's not geared towards what I'm looking for. I am a software engineer, though, and the reason that's beneficial is because Claude, with that many tokens, can ingest your entire software project and understand it. Same thing, writing a thing, different verbiage and syntax. One is human legible, one's computer legible. So I figured I'd give that a shot. Moved to where I was just using Claude.ai in the UI, and it was functional. I essentially created a project and had an instruction set in that project to drive a lot of the common interactions. And I was using artifacts in the project space. So each chapter became an artifact. And it worked, but it was really slow and prone to failure. It's not a problem with the AI, it's more about the interaction model. So it's really slow to write to the artifact because it's not like it's writing to a file, it's rendering a React component for you in real time and populating the contents of it. So it's having to do the overhead of generating the UI and generating the contents. And in doing so, if anything fails in the communication process, it essentially just gives up. And if it's going to make 800 lines of edits, it's like, all right, this sucks. So then I had moved to Claude Desktop. Now this is the real differentiation between ChatGPT and the competition. ChatGPT does have a desktop application, but it doesn't seem to be MCP compliant or have file system access, which is normally provided through an MCP server. Claude Desktop does. It's a baked-in local connector, so you can just say, here's the directories you have access to, and then you go. So I saw that I could solve the problem of that rate of interaction, and I didn't need the artifacts anymore. They were just files on the file system. So at this point, we're a step closer to what I'm comfortable with as a software engineer. I decided to write in Markdown because it's relatively ubiquitous nowadays. And I chose to control my version history with Git, specifically GitLab. We'll get into that way later on for automations and formatting. But it's more comfortable and workable at this point. Then there's the problem of reading. Reading it, unless you're comfortable with Markdown, it's not like it's just going to translate for you. So a lot of the structures that we'll go through in later sections of the video are built around a service called MDBook. It's an open source project. We will give you a Docker Compose file to literally start it with the writing project next to it. And the reason for that is MDBook renders it in a web page running locally. And anytime the files change, it's updated automatically. So the benefit is you don't have to care about the files. You just care about viewing them in MD Book, and essentially from there, interacting with the AI to add, make changes, remove stuff, etc. You're just viewing it from MD Book's perspective. It worked okay. There were a lot of limitations I ran into where you couldn't do more than a chapter in a chat. And it's not really a limitation of the context window. It's more a limitation of the Electron app that Claude Desktop is, because it keeps this long running history. And it worked. I mean, you're still able to move way faster than you could otherwise. But then I moved to Claude Code in VS Code. Claude Code does require Anthropic Claude Max. It is not cheap. It's like $100 a month. But I figured I would sink the money into it to try, because I've always wanted to write a book, and if it helped me write a book, it was worth it. So the benefit to this model is some things change. Like, there's not a project anymore. You can't have projects, and you can bind Claude to a project, but the way you handle your instruction set is way easier. It's just a file in your project now. It's not something in the architecture of Claude. The other thing is your interactions with it are essentially just a terminal in the IDE, and you don't run into that grind to a halt at a chapter. It seems to handle your history a lot more sanely. You're always in control. The thing that I do like about it is that when it goes to write things, it provides you IDE-specific tools. Like, it'll show you a diff window showing in Visual Studio Code, which is what we will use because it's free. It'll show you, here's what I'm looking at doing. Do you want Claude to make this change? But you also have the option to say, like, I'll allow all these edits for this session. I personally recommend that approach, because if you're already relying on Git and you can fall back to previous commits, there's no reason to burden yourself with, like, yes, 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 yes. It just doesn't make sense. So that model works exceptionally well. And then lastly, the thing that really moves this into the space of, like, I'm way more prepared to be a writer than I was expecting to be, is we've already established we just have Markdown for files. We're using Git as our version control. Most upstream Git providers like GitLab or GitHub, I wildly prefer GitLab, recommend GitLab. Just create private repos, because it's your book, don't want other people finding it, because you can have automations. Don't let that scare you. We will provide, I'll give a gist that I'll link to in the video of, here's a very parameterized GitLab action that will read from your file system, and on a tag, we'll talk about that in detail later, but, like, you could do it on every push if you wanted to. It's just a lot of artifacts. It generates a zip file of the EPUB of the book at the current state and a docx file. Originally, I didn't even have a docx file. I thought everyone wanted an EPUB file, and then I hired an editor. Also, a moment to bring this up here. You can edit your own story with AI, but it is not what I would recommend. The reason I say that is, when we're writing a story, we know what we're trying to express, and we can give instructions around that as best we can. Editing is a specialized skill, and unless you're already good at it or you have a foundation for it, you're not going to be able to give a good enough instruction set to the LLM for it to do what I would consider professional grade editing. I would say find someone on Fiverr. I did. It was like $1,400. Oh God. But it's professional editing. At that point, it comes back. I'm just going to take the document he gives me, give it to Claude, and say, summarize the edits that are recommended, and let's go through them one by one, because I'm not going to do that crap by hand. And then at that point, you can already generate an EPUB, which means you're already formatted, and you can already go to publishing. The last thing I'll mention in this section is how important it is to be transparent about your AI use as an author. I am using AI as a ghostwriter. Essentially, I'm not writing a lot of the words. I'm describing the desired outcomes, letting it write, interacting to get revisions and changes. And that allows me to move at a very rapid pace. I wrote my 81,000 word book in 3 days. So that's 10x essentially Stephen King's rate. Not the same quality in any way, shape, or form, but it's wildly different from an author's perspective. Be like, wow, I can crank a book out, versus like, I will never have time to do this. But in doing so, it is important to let people know what AI did. So I have an example that I'll provide you that lists everything that I generated my cover with Midjourney, and then used Illustrator to set the type component, the typeface components, etc. But you just want to be, as transparent as you can with people. But at that point, you're ready to publish. You already have an EPUB that has your cover, your forward, your chapters, everything. And you can go to like KDP if you wanted to, which is where I will publish once my editing is done. But that's enough rambling. What we will do in the next sections of the video is go through essentially the phases of this, so you can see why we get to where we are in the end. And at the end, I should be able to give you a template of things that you could use to do on your own. You would just need Claude Max in order to get Claude Code. So stick with me if you're not interested in any of the sessions or sections in the future, and you just want to get to that, hey, I'm in Visual Studio Code with Claude Code, totally fine. But I will see you in the future sections. Okay, so we're going to talk about the first phase of this journey that I went through and why it really fell apart. I've got ChatGPT open. I don't pay for an account with OpenAI anymore, so it's going to be kind of limited. But we'll just walk through what this looks like. Let's track the first chapter in an artifact markdown. So this is normally what you'll see. This is what we refer to as an artifact within the space. And this is a thing. It needs more vampires and robots. So what it's doing is the artifact exists on its own. So it's going back and editing it as you go. Everything seems fine right now, but what will happen is, if you're bridging past, I'm just writing a cute story for the sake of exposition for a video, you'll run into problems very quickly. You can have multiple artifacts in a project, but the problem is your context window is really limited. You'll have problems where your character's tone will be kind of off between chapters. And the big thing that just ruined it for me is, once you have a single chapter that may be more than like 4,000 words, as it edits this artifact, it's just going to get into a loop where it'll insert the same text over and over and over again. If you've ever used any kind of like role-playing tools, like how was it, AI Dungeon? I used to love that when it first came out. Similar problem. The context gets kind of polluted and it starts to just regurgitate the same thing over and over again. And it is unable to do anything about it. It's just like start over, which is not useful for me writing a story. So this fell apart, and then we got into Claude.ai. Claude.ai, if you pay for Max, gives you a 1 million token context window, way larger. And the benefit is, when you create a project, you can give it an instruction set. Don't worry about reading this. This will be provided as a gist separately, so that you can leverage this. This essentially just drives the what's called the React loop. So when you interact with the agent, it's going to follow these instructions. It's a lot about making sure files exist. That matters not here, because it doesn't have access to the file system here. But it's a way of saying, hey, perform these actions. And one of the things I did and started doing in the space was working on state management. So we have a project, and we have an instruction set. And let's say we had 5 or 6 chapters. What you would run into is essentially a problem where consistency is a problem, timeline gaps appear between chapters. There's just a lot of odd space. So I took the approach of having two central artifacts, one that was referred to as the Bible originally, because that is a literary term, but I just refer to it as notes now, and transition files. So if we look at the instruction set, if no notes.md exists, this is probably our first interaction to all this stuff. And then when we're done with a chapter, it's supposed to create a transition file. What has changed in this chapter is seen, what was added in this chapter is seen, what was expounded upon from the source of truth, and where are there any long-term considerations. So then what happens is when you go start a new chapter, you tell it, hey, I'd like to start chapter 4. Please read the previous chapter and its transition and the notes, summarize where we are for me, and generate an outline that you think makes sense for this chapter. This is not about letting it do the work for you for the writing. It's about first establishing context. At this point, it can read your previous chapter, its transition file, which is a differential or a delta from notes. It can then read notes. So if you have details and notes about, like I have a character named John, he's very stoic, short on words, very terse, that gets absorbed into the context. So the agent already knows how to write as John. So you don't run into problems where they just talk differently chapter by chapter. And that works well, but the problem is it's a lot of stuff to read into context. But more than that, these conversations can span a very large span. And it's not the context of the files that's huge. It's just this UI tracking this content drags this website down. So you get to a point where you're essentially just, creating, essentially one chapter per chat. It's still doable. You can move a hell of a lot faster than you could otherwise. But there was just more. I knew you could move forward because these artifacts are slow and they're prone to failure. And it's not even really the application's fault. It's about oddities, about how LLMs are not stochastic. They're not going to do the same thing the same way every time. They arrive at a different endpoint through different pathways. So sometimes when you tell it to make an edit, it may just locate the lines and change them. Sometimes it'll just rewrite the whole file with the changes in it. And when you get into that, it takes a long time. And if anything fails in that space, that artifact just kind of dies. So this wasn't the end-all be-all, but it did give me a framework that I could start working with. And the next chapter we're going to get into deals very specifically with the next evolution of this, which is Claude Desktop. So if you're still with me, I will see you in a few moments for the next chapter. Okay, so now we're getting kind of into the meat and potatoes. Now we have desktop, and the reason desktop matters is under settings, we can have these connectors that include file system, and we can just give it directories that it's allowed to work with. Let's go back to projects. Type this out. Help me with the next. Please read all chapters, transitions, and summarize current state. Also provide an outline for the next chapter. We'll just go. So this is not normally as streamlined if you don't have the instruction set that I'm using. So what it's going to go through is, I can find your book. That's read from a separate place so that it knows where to find it. It'll essentially go through and read everything to kind of try to figure out where we are. This is the goal. We want it to kind of read through all the files. Read multiple files for Windows for me always fails, even though I have granted permission for it. It's not a big deal. It'll essentially read through the files individually. And at the end of this, it should basically say, here's my state. I what I'm going to do here. So I mentioned that I work in Markdown. That is not normally how you'd want to read the stuff. So what I have running is I have MD book running. So you can see it's read through chapters 1 through 4, which are listed here. Outline for chapter 5. If we look at chapter 5, there's some stuff in here. This is from a previous version. It's not a big deal. Because this is in Git, I'm not really worried. I'm just going to let it write whatever it wants to write. Yeah, go for it. In the real world, we would have read through this and possibly had a back and forth saying, hey, I don't like the outline. Let's try this instead of that. Let's make these changes. For the sake of brevity, I just want to show this essentially moving quickly. So you'll notice it just starts writing a file. You can watch it writing. You won't see it here until the write has occurred. Essentially what's happening is this is occurring in memory as it's trying to build the byte stream that goes into the file. But when it's done, we will see it represented locally in Gitbook. The benefit to this is you don't care about the markdown. It's already formatted for you. You see it as it's supposed to be seen. This is actually the exact same way your EPUB book will be formatted. And MD book will refresh whenever the files are changed. So once this thing writes the file, we can see some of the content. Like you can read some of it as it goes. I wouldn't even recommend that. You can get kind of caught up in things. It's easier to do that, go get a drink of something or eat. It won't take that long. It'll be a few minutes, and then it'll basically say like, hey, I've written the chapter. Can you go through it? So we'll give it a second. Finish up. And this process is, I would say, 4 times easily faster than using the artifacts in the Claude UI. Especially if you have a large body of work that you're working on, because that process we did in the beginning for reading all the files, if it's doing that from artifacts, it's just a lot of churn in the UI that isn't really necessary. It's a little bit faster here, but the big limitation you'll run into is like you'll have a chapter for a conversation for every chapter. Anything beyond that, you'll notice just trying to type down here gets really slow. So we solved that in later states by moving to Claude Code. Let's see how this thing's going. It doesn't help that this is actually like a book I'm actually writing about the video that we're doing, and there's a lot of content that I've asked it to go over. And sometimes you'll find it can get really verbose in places it doesn't need to. That's always fun. I value momentum over perfection. So for me, it's better to be like, hey, I got something. I don't think this section is as necessary. Let's try removing that and then moving forward. So where do we sit in this whole monster? Professional backup. It's going into a lot of stuff about Git because I've told it a lot about how I use Git, which isn't super helpful because a lot of this stuff, oh, one thing I will mention, if you tend to have very technical literature or you have things that are like large artifacts like clippings from newspapers, etc., sometimes from an author's perspective, it's better to move those into an appendix or something later. One of the problems I've run into with this book alone is just dealing with, a chapter on Markdown. It vomited all this whole section about like, here's all the cheat sheet for Git, Markdown, and it was just unwieldy because of how much content was there. So I asked it like, can we move this into Appendix 02, update summary, and link to it from here? Another big benefit is links are native to Markdown. There's a syntax for it, and you can use it for local files, and they will translate for EPUBs. Oh, so it vomited everything out. So if we look at version 5, I mean, this is everything it basically just gave me. It should be. Let's verify. Make sure I'm not looking at the wrong thing. AI assisted writing. Picture this. Where is that file? Either way. I have probably got too many books going on right now, but the fact is this thing wrote the file out. If there's something you don't like about it, you can, let's remove passive tone where we can. It'll go through and scan the file that you just edited and make the changes you asked for. And this comes back to, like, I wildly prefer velocity and momentum over perfection, because it doesn't have to be perfect. Getting closer to a final story or a final instruction set is important. And then at the end, one of the big benefits to this is you can say, hey, can you read all chapters and let's scan for inconsistencies of tone, let's scan for timeline gaps, characters introduced in the wrong order. You can treat the AI as a really dedicated assistant, essentially, just like I'm treating it as a really dedicated ghostwriter. But this model with the desktop still has a lot of problems. You can even kind of notice, just as it operates, the interactions with this tool start to get kind of slower. The more work you do with it, the worse that gets. So in the next section, we'll talk about the next evolution of this that I've gotten to. And we'll go from there. So I'll see you in the next video. We're going to have a way crazier setup, but I look forward to seeing you there. Okay, so welcome to the part that most of you are probably going to skip to. So we've looked at the previous iterations, and now we've kind of settled on Claude Code, and I want to focus on this in a Visual Studio Code scenario. So first, before we go any further, we have to talk about claude.md. So we talked about in the previous chapters having an instruction set within a project. You can still have instructions and projects leveraging Claude Code, but if you have a claude.md in your project, you can use that as your instruction set. And I find that wildly more valuable because it's one less place you have to go. It's just another file here. So you'll notice it's very similar, but it's much more tuned to the file system. Your source directory is so-and-so. Source directory should be read from a file in the project called source. It can be a file. It can be, a variable. I may change some of this later, but what it's about is, hey, if there's no notes, this is probably our first time, it's going to create a file structure, and the file structure will be source with an en directory, and then notes at the top, and some other stuff. We'll come back to this in a second when I finish going through Claude. It has a section about summary.md for MD book, and then there's the loop, the general order of operations. Whenever the user asks for a new chapter, let's see if an existing chapter exists, and then it's the process of read everything. And at the end of a chapter, it's supposed to re-summarize components into notes that are key, and then also produce transition files. It also has instructions for how files should be named. And lastly, summary.md should be updated so that our MD books is running. Where this becomes really useful is you can literally run MD book from Docker Compose here. Like literally you just start it from the project, MD book is running locally on port 3000. You don't have to do anything else at that point. And then at that point, once you have to go to plugins or extensions, and you can search for Claude Code and install it. Then you get this little window here. It's essentially a terminal. Same thing. So we're going to say, hey, I'd like to start chapter 6. Please read chapter 5, summarize current state, and provide a potential outline for the chapter summary. Forgive me that it's slow. It's not normally this slow. It's just right now I'm running OBS and a whole bunch of other crap, and it's kind of beating my Windows desktop to death. But we'll say go do the thing. It's going to read claude.md for its instruction set, which says, oh, you have to go read all this other stuff. And you'll see very similar interactions. But the speed at which it does things is way faster. Yeah, wrong place for it. The other great thing is Claude can run commands. That's not really important as a writer, but for some other things, like I had it just write a bash script to give me word counts. So it's just iterating over everything. Just trying to get current state. It should summarize everything once it's done. The other cool thing is it'll tell you how many tokens it's consuming in the process. I have seen it get up into the hundreds of thousands as I've worked on my fiction novel. Nowhere near it. But essentially it's like, hey, chapter 5 covers 6. Yeah, based on chapter 6's ending. We're going to talk about this. Would you like me to proceed? Yeah, go for it. So it may pop up here and be like, do you want to make this change? This is optional, what's referred to as the plan. That's, you hit Control T. It'll tell you in the text, or like, hey, hit Control T to display the plan. But it'll literally write these things out. And we're focusing on chapter 7, which is empty here, as you can see. So when it's done, you know, we'll just take a look at the file, see how it gets generated. May take a second. It's maybe one of those things where I cut a section out of the video. There's a lot of stuff I want to deal with after this about why this model makes sense. This, for example, may look terrifying. This is the automation that I mentioned before for GitLab that generates the EPUBs. I didn't write that by hand. I mean, I understand how to. I just ain't nobody got time for that, per se. So you can ask Claude to do these things for you, and it will literally say like, hey, I've done it. You should be able to do this now. Go try it. I will include this file as well as the instructions.md as gists so that we can link to them from the video. That way you'll have a starting point. You can at least copy and paste that into your directory when you start. And when you ask Claude about it, it can read it, get an understanding of where it is, and determine what changes it needs to do. I have tried to make this as variable as I can so that in your notes file, you will have an author and a title and all these things. It reads these out of this file to use those when it generates the EPUB, like what's the title of the book, what's the author, etc. So don't be terrified of it. The AI can also be your technical assistant just as much as it can be a writer's assistant. So we're at 5,000 tokens. So you'll notice it hasn't written anything. Similar to the other one, it's doing work, but it's essentially establishing in memory what it's going to write. When it's ready, it's going to write that to the file system at once. But the whole goal of this model is to, like, you get comfortable with giving it an outline, you go back and forth about what it is you like, and then it writes it, you read it in MD book, and you go back and you're like, hey, let's change X, Y, and Z. And it couldn't write the file. All right, it took about 5 minutes to finish, but you'll notice this is what the IDE integrations gives you. It's like, hey, do you want to make this edit? You can say yes. I generally recommend saying yes to all because we're using Git to track everything. So if I want to go backwards, screw it. And then immediately it shows up in MD book and we scroll through. This is not a short amount of content, which is kind of cool. And a lot of this is very technical because this chapter is about automation and publishing. Let's say, is it still thinking? Yeah. Oh, it's going to try and create the transition. So the instruction set told it when we're done that it needs to create the transition files and summaries, which is why it's still there. There's the transition file, which if we look at it, those don't show up in MD book because they are not chapters. They're not listed there. But this is just a summary. It's a condensed version of the content so that this smaller subset of context can be consumed for a later chapter's start without it having to read the whole chapter per se. So when we come back here, it's like, hey, I finished everything. What I'm going to do is git status, git add, git commit stuff for video. So we have an established point now. I'm not worried about it. Let's do, let's add some random ASCII cats to the intro to chapter 7. You wouldn't really ask that normally, but you can. This is the thing. I mean, you can. And actually, some of the best things that I've done, it just vomited them out here. It's also, I've added 2 delightful ASCII cats. Nah, cats don't work. Let's scrap them and add a unicorn instead. This is the dumbest use of AI, but if you take these interactions, like any interaction you would have with an actual ghostwriter, so if you spent a crap ton of money, what? If you spent a crap ton of money with a ghostwriter, you would get text back, have to review it, and then ask for changes. What I'm going to do is git reset hard, and then magically we're back to where we were, no problem. But this cycle continues, then you move to the next chapter. It's like, all right, let's start on chapter 8. It's going to read through its instruction set, say, I have to read the last chapter, current state, summarize, write and revise chapter 8 and the transition file. That's all kind of solidified for it. Chapter 8 for us is going to be advanced ghostwriting. That was from an outline. It came up in the beginning. It's probably not what I'll keep, but let's roll with it and see where it goes. That is actually the biggest benefit for me, is if you struggle with writer's block, it's kind of amazing that you can just be like, just throw stuff at the wall and see if it sticks. The greatest thing in the book that I've written, The Fifth Anomaly, was literally, I was tired. Like, it was 2 in the morning and I just didn't know what to do. And I was like, all right, just have the terminal flash up some kawaii otaku text with a bunch of emoticons. And it was so unhinged that it became critical to the book at that point. So it's very useful for that. But this process, I mean, just while we've been talking, we've probably generated maybe 6,000 to 8,000 lines, maybe by the end of this chapter, 10,000 words. You can move quick, but you can move quickly and consistently. It's about how much work you put into building your notes. And I don't think you should try to write it by hand. What I would recommend is just starting a discussion with Claude saying, I'd like to build my notes file. Let's talk about, characters, locations, events, major plot arc, maybe overall outline for the book. And then from there, that gets solidified. And then when you go to write the individual chapters, the LLM has a lot more state to build from. And at this point, if you go through this way, you have your automation. It doesn't have to be GitLab. If you want to use GitHub, you want to use a private one like GitEA, you can do that. And Claude can help you build the automations to automate your formatting stage so that you already have EPUBs. What I have is essentially a convention where you have assets, images that you use in here. The cover is expected to be in here as cover.png. You can have appendices, you can have forwards, you can have copyright data. Copyright is where I include the AI disclaimer. So not all inclusive, but it is very heavily inclusive. So if you can follow this standard, I may even create like a public GitHub template repository for this. So you could say like, oh crap, okay, I can just clone this, or I can give you a zip file of GitLab so you can just unzip it into a directory and then get in it and you're good to go. Because everyone should be able to do this. And a lot of these tools, well, I just wrote a lot more. Yeah. So a lot of these tools like Squibbler and a lot of them, they're doing similar things. It's about context management. When you get into the AI development space, it's not much more than context management now. So, hopefully this is useful. I'll make sure in the comments that we have just links to the claude.md markdown. I may even just include a link to an empty structure that we can zip up and hand around so that you have something to start from. And then in theory, you can just open that directory in Visual Studio Code and start interacting with Claude to write your book. And you're paying for Claude Max, but you're also not paying for a third party, and you are in way more control here, and you have more assistance. It's not just about writing. Claude serves the benefit of technical support, general editing. My instruction set actually asks for 2 passes of edits about duplicity for terminology, duplicity for descriptions, gaps in tone and things like that. And you can change the instruction set however you feel it is necessary for your book. I feel like this is as close to you as the user as you can get and still give you that power without having to just, I paid for this service and I'm just stuck with whatever it vomits out. So hopefully this is useful. This is not the final form of the book as it will come out, but I will write a book on this. I may write a software as a service platform for it just to codify this kind of mentality. But I want to make it clear to everyone you can do this yourself.